Good morning, guys.
Good morning, Rabbi.
All right. Wow, Chevra. We got to get ready for this.
And how do you get ready for it?
That's a good kasha. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Chai, Daf Yud Ches. This is the Chayis of Pesachim. Chevra, we are learning what we call Hilchas El Mashiach, and indeed may we merit to be able to put into practice all of these halachas. We are continuing to learn the sugya of mashkin. We began on Daf Tezvav, Amid Beis in the bottom. There's a Braisa on Daf Tez Zayin. We have to review the Braisa. We have the first statement, Safik mashkin li tamei. If there's a Safik where the liquids became tamei themselves. So Rav Meir holds the mashkin are tamei based on the rules of Safik midoiraisa l'chumra. Rabbi Meir holds that mashkin themselves become tamei midoiraisa. However, l'tamei acherim, Rav Meir holds tahar, as Rav Meir says that tumas mashkin l'tamei acherim is midrabana. Shita number one. Shita number two is Rabbi Elazar. Even though Rabbi Elazar says kidvarav, but let's now just remind ourselves that the Rav holds that the Tana, Rabbi Elazar is really more than Rav Meir, because he holds that not only do mashkin not convey tuma midoiraisa, Rabbi Elazar holds, according to Rav, that mashkin don't even acquire tuma midoiraisa. Then we have the opposite side was Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds la koil tamei. Not only do mashkin acquire tuma midoiraisa, but mashkin convey tuma midoiraisa. And la koil means whether the suffix is whether they touched kalim, whether the suffix is whether they touched other oichlin. In both cases, we're going to be machmer. And then we have the shita of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, and they differentiate it. They hold that acquiring tuma midoiraisa, conveying tuma depends. Lo oichalin tmein, to foods midoiraisa. Whether mashkin can convey tuma to kalim, that's only midrabanan. Now we are up to explaining shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, we said on Daf Yud Zayin Amid Beis Chazar Boy, and we had a raya from a Mishnah in kalim. By the fact that we have this heked midrabanan by kalim, if mashkin touched it, is a raya that Rabbi Yehuda holds that mashkin being metame kalim is taka tame, but only midrabanan, and therefore we had that difference between the inside and the outside. Question is, that was the bottom of Daf Yud Zayin Amid Beis. Do we say that the Rabbi Yehuda completely, now that Chazar Boy agrees to Rabbi Meir, do we say that Rabbi Yehuda holds that mashkin midoiraisa don't convey tuma to anything? Or no, you have a raya taka from the Mishnah in Kalim that Rabbi Yehuda holds that mashkin does not convey tuma to Kalim on a biblical level, but maybe to a chalin it does convey. In other words, perhaps Rabbi Yehuda will hold like the last two Tanoim, like Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, that hold lo'icholin if there's a dal tameim and lekelim toim. That is where we are up to. Okay, and we brought a Mishnah from Pada, and over there the Mishnah is speaking about a cow that consumed mechatos. Mechatos has a din of a av. If a cow that's alive drinks it, the cow will not become tummy because of the general rule that a living creature, a living being other than a yid, cannot acquire tumah while alive. Okay, but now the cow was shechted within 24 hours from its consumption, which means that the liquids are still, the mechatos liquid is still in the intestines. The Tanach indeed says that the meat of the cow is tummy, and Rabbi Yehuda says that batlu b'mayel. Batlu b'mayel seems l'choda to be saying that the meat is b'chlal not tummy. There's no tumah on the meat. Now the question is, now the proof is, that was where we up to, that if Rabbi Yehuda were to hold that mashkin can convey tuma on a biblical level, like Rabbi Yossi, at least for other oichalin, right? So even though the mechatos is batel b'mayal, like we explained, because there wasn't the guarding over the liquids, so it definitely loses the status of an av. But it doesn't make sense to say that it's not even a rishon, Because like Rashi uses the words, the nitemuhu machmas atzman, the ein nigia gedoyla, there's no greater contact, the water touched itself. So if it loses the status of mechatos, but let the waters at least retain a tum on the level of a rishon. Now, if a rishon touches food, chulin, even chulin can become a sheni. So mainly, if you're going to say that Rabbi Yehuda chazer boy completely, and now he holds like Rabbi Meir, that mashkin being metama, even foods is only midrabanan, we can explain that in such an unusual case, because of it being unusual, there's no tuma at all. Mainly. But if we're going to hold that he holds like Rabbi Yossi, then Rabbi Meir should have held that the meats at least have a din of a sheni. Is araya? That's where we left off. That Rabbi Yehuda completely chazer boy, and Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Meir. We're going to take off right now on the 5th line from the top of the Amud, and the Gemara is going to say that's not correct. That Rabbi Yehuda can hold like Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. We're going to give various explanations to explain the Mishnah in Para. And with this, after pointing out that we don't say that Rabbi Yehuda completely chazer boy, but Rabbi Yehuda was only chazer boy regarding it being metama kelim, then Daf Yud Ches is going to move on to explain the shita of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. Now, why do they differentiate? Why do they say that mashkin could be metama or cholin on a din Torah, which is why if there's a doubt, we say tameim, but mashkin cannot be metama kelim midoiraisa. It's not metama kelim doiraisa. It's metama oichlin midoiraisa, not metama kelim. Where do they get that from? And we will then introduce the sheet of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yossi, don't forget, is one of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. And we're going to further clarify, just like Rabbi Yehuda chazer boy, we'll discover on Daf Yud Ches that Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yossi was really not speaking about his own shita. Rabbi Yossi was only telling us what his teacher Rabbi Akiva were to hold. But Rabbi Yossi himself doesn't subscribe to the words that we had on the Brais and Daf Zayin, which is Gavaldik. In other words, two of the Tanoi mentioned on the Brais and Daf Zayin themselves don't really hold that way right now. So we're going to speak about Chitas Rabbi Akiva. We're going to learn that Rabbi Akiva, guys, hold on to your seats. Rabbi Akiva holds that there is a shlishi to chulin, oy gewalt. We don't paskin that way. We don't accept that. And we're going to learn one of the sources that we mentioned in brief on Daf Yud Daled in the beginning, that lo motzinu tuma she'oisa kayotzeba, that we never find an edible tuma that can make something of its own nature, food, tamei. Remember that? Ein oichel metama oichel. Guys, don't forget on Daf Yud Daled we had really 3 shitas. Whether we say ein oichel metama oichel only by chulin, whether we say ein oichel metama oichel by chulin and by truma, but by kachim it does. This links us back to what we learned yesterday about Chagai. In the kasha that the Chagai faher the kahanim, there was oichel touching oichel. There was the lechem, right, touching the nazit. Now, whether we say ein oichel matama oichel, even by kachim, that's only Ravina. Remember, Aliyah the Rava, there's 3 shitas, so just remember that. But we're going to learn more about this concept that on a biblical level, ein leimotzino tuma she'oisa kayotzeba. And then Rava, at the end of Daf Yud Ches, says that we know that Rabbi Yossi doesn't agree with Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva does not agree with Rabbi Yossi. We'll see exactly what he's referring to. We're going to have an unbelievable review of the rule of Dayoy. We'll learn what that Dayoy means. We'll chazer what Dayoy means, and then we're going to learn a gavaldic exception to the din of Dayoy. Chevra, this is mamish taka the chayas of Pesachim. Ashreinu matoiv chalkeinu chevra. Let's start on the 5th line from the top of the Amud. So again, we just l'chu'ura proved from the Mishnah and Para, the fact that Rabbi Yehuda holds that the meat seemingly is bechlal not tamei is a raya that Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Meir, that mashkin is not matama oichlin biblically at all. Because if not, even though the mechatas should go down from an a, but it should become a rishon, because the water touched itself, rishon is matama chulin. And here, even chulin it's metama. So the meat should become a sheni. Is that right that he holds like Rav Meir? Says the Gemara, no. I will tell you. You proved from the Mishnah and Kalim that when it comes to mashkin being mitame kalim, yes, Rabbi Yehuda chazer boy, Rabbi Yehuda holds that liquids cannot be mitame kalim biblically, like Rabbi Yossi, like Rabbi Shimon. But when it comes to liquids being able to mitama oicholin, Rabbi Yossi still holds his ground that it does indeed in part tuma toicholin biblically. And my batlu b'mayel nami zok the Gemara only batlu mituma chamura. Who told you that Rabbi Yehuda holds that the meat is completely tar? All he's saying is that the meat is not a rishon, because the mechatas is no longer enough, because it became nullified b'mayel. Avol tuma kala nitamu, but the meat indeed is a sheni. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Yossi and Rab Shimon. Says the Gemara, hold on, 7 lines from the top of the Amid. How will that work? Don't forget that there's a Mishnah that quotes a machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanach. So whatever the shita is of Rabbi Yehuda, that means that the Tanach is more machmer. Which means that if that's the pshat on Rabbi Yehuda, Michlal the Tanach sovar, that tuma chamura nami metamu. The Tanach holds, like we mentioned, that's not written explicitly, but since the shechita happened within 24 hours from when the cow drank the mechatas still retains the status of mechatas. The mechatas is an av, and the meat is a tamei on a level of a rishon. That's a problem. I'll tell you why that's a problem. Because the look inside the last line on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, it says bisara tamei. Bisara tamei means only the meat becomes tamei. That implies that if this water would have touched the keli, then it would not be metama keli. Now I know that a rishon cannot be metama, not oichlin, not adam and not keli midoraisa. Correct. But if Rabbi Yehuda holds that the water is a rishon, the Tanakama is more machman, that means the Tanakama holds that the mechatas is an av, then this waters have a koyach, not only to be metama meat, it can be metama anything. Why did the Tanakama say bisara tamei? Bisara tamei seems to imply that only meat that had contact with this water becomes tamei. Why? According to the Tanakama, the water should have the koyach to be metama, even adam, even kalim. The water is an av. So the Gemara says, I stand my ground. Rabbi Yehuda holds that the meat is tummy. Elamat's tummy as a sheni. And there's no machlokes in this Mishnah. This entire Mishnah is quoting Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. And Takal Rabbi Yehuda, only the meat can become tummy. Because since the waters is a rishon cannot be metama, not adam and not kalim, biblically. Kul Rabbi Yehuda he, and now you shecht it within 24 hours, takeb sort of remains tummy. But what level of tuma? All this is Rabbi Yehuda, tuma kala. The meat only becomes a sheni. If the mechatos would have retained the status of an av, then not only will the meat will be a rishon, but more, it's not only meat. That moisture, whatever it touches, will be matamet. Because shed Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, that batlo be ma'eho. Beautiful. So that's one way of understanding the Mishnah and Para, in which it's going to come out that you can't prove that Rabbi Yehuda was chazer like Rav Meir. Now, the way l'chayre we should lump shot in the Gemara, it's not that the Gemara is saying it could be one way, it could be the other way. You have to prove that Rabbi Yehuda changed his mind. So yesterday we had a Mishnah in Kalim that proves that Rabbi Yehuda changed his mind. Fine, we accept that by Kalim, that mashkin cannot be metame Kalim biblically. But unless you prove that Rabbi Yehuda also changed his mind vis-a-vis can mashkin be metama oichlin, then we say that he stays. That if you can't prove that, then what we have in a brayso stands. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Yossi and Rab Shimon, not like Rabbi Meir. Yes, mashkin acquire tuma. The only one that says mashkin doesn't even acquire tuma biblically is Rav's understanding in the Tana Rabbi Lazar. Whether it can impart tuma, it depends. To kalim, not biblically. To eichalim, yes, biblically. Rav Ashi Yamar, also another way of showing us that Rabbi Yehuda will not hold like Rabbi Meir. La'olam batlo b'mayel legamri. That shittas Rabbi Yehuda. It should be a rishon. No, meshum dahavale mashka suruach, because now it's putrid. So now it completely is precluded from tuma. So it's different. In other words, you're speaking about liquids that was inside the innards of an animal. Now, guys, we learned about this topic so much in Chulin. Just be what happens if you shecht an animal and the animal just ate not kosher. What's the status of not kosher? Remember, that's connected to this concept of Rav Ashi, that when something is inside an animal and then you shecht it, could be completely putrid. And therefore, it's not called mashkin at all. Okay, now that we concluded clarifying that Rabbi Yehuda was only chazar by Kalim, now we are going back to the Brais on Daf Tes Zayin. And the Brais quotes Rabbi Yossi and Rab Shimon Oimrim like this. The case in the Brais, guys, is when you have mashkin. Mashkin is tummy. That's not the mashkin maybe touched oicholin, maybe it touched Kalim. and we already quoted the Dri, the Tosfos. We don't apply Suffolk Rishus HaYachad, the Suffolk Rishus HaRabim for whatever reason. So we have to fall back on the general rule, Suffolk D'Oraisa L'Chumra, Suffolk D'Rabbanan L'Kula. So Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon say that if the doubt is whether it touched Oichalin, then both foods are Tamei. That's predicated, that's based on Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon holding that mashkin are Mitame Kalim, Mida Oiraisa, Suffolk D'Oraisa L'Chumra. Oichalin, it's Matama Oichalin Doiraisa. But if the doubt is whether it touched Kalim, then we're going to paskin both of them are Tohirin because of the rule that Suffolk D'Rabbanan L'Kula and Mashkin, according to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, biblically cannot be Matama Kalim. Now, why would there be such a difference? Amar Rabba Bar Chana Amar Reish Lakish. Let me explain to you, Rabbi Yossi. Now, it's very important to point out that we're not saying, let me explain to you, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. And the Tzlach explains the reason why he doesn't mention Rabbi Shimon. What we will explain will work for both. But as we will finish Daf Yud Ches, we will see, like we mentioned in the words of introduction, that Rabbi Yossi himself doesn't agree with this statement. Rabbi Yossi was just telling you what his Rebbe, Rabbi Akiva, were to say. Rabbi Shimon himself holds of this statement. So we just want to separate them, not to put them in the same boat. But let's go now to the Shita. Rabbi Yossi, B'Shitas Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yamaro. Rabbi Yossi came to this because he took what he heard from his Rebbe and then he expanded it. He applied it to a place where Rabbi Akiva never opined, but Rabbi Akiva would agree to that. But that was the Chiddush of Rabbi Yossi, furthering the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. What did he learn from Rabbi Akiva? Now, whoever has a Chumash, if you would like to open a Chumash, it's very helpful. Parsha Shmini, we quoted this pasuk in the beginning of the sugya. Perik Yud Aleph, we're going to learn through psukim Lamed Gimel and Lamed Dalet. What's the context of these psukim? There, the Torah is speaking about sheretz imparting tuma to a klei cheres. There's something unique about a klei cheres that's not negea for the sugya, but quickly reviewing that normally tuma is imparted through contact. Where do you not need contact? By corpse tuma, right? According to everyone, by a corpse, according to the Rashbi, only by a yid. There, even though there was no physical contact, oil. Normally you have to have some sort of contact. There's magad, there's masa, right? Carrying, you're moving it, hesed. What happens if you have, this is a klei cheres, this is earthenware. And if there's a sheretz that's dead from the Shmoyne Shiratzim, that has a din of an av, if someone chopped the mouse by the tail and he put it in the airspace of the keli. So that's the rule of a klei cheres, that it acquires tuma because tuma entered its airspace even though there was no contact. That's din number one. And what's now the status of the keli? The keli now is a rishon because the sheretz is enough, it goes down, a rishon. Then the Torah says like this, v'chol klei cheres, asher yipol mehem al toichoy, which means the klei cheres now, a sheretz went in there, so now the klei cheres is a rishon. Koil asher b'toichoy yitma. Anything else that's in there will become tummy. Now, what's the anything else? What's the anything else, my friends? Well, let's say it's food. All right. Now, on what level will the food become tummy? What level will the food become tummy? On a rishon or on a sheni? So here's an important din. No, not an addition. I'll tell you why. Let's speak about a case where the sheretz, I'm still hanging the sheretz in here. The sheretz is still in here, but the sheretz is not touching anything. Now, guys, if there's food in my keli and the sheretz touches the food, yeah, the food becomes addition. You're right. But you know what? If a keli is in there and the sheretz touches the keli also becomes addition. An av is matama keli. The Torah here never mentions a keli. From there, we learn that we're not speaking about the sheretz touching anything. Sheretz imparts tuma even though it doesn't touch the keli. And even if there's food in there while the sheretz is in there, or after you took out the sheretz, it makes no difference. Any food in this keli becomes tummy because it's in the airspace of the keli. But it's sheretz, keli, to something that's in there. So av is the sheretz, the keli is a rishon. Now, a rishon cannot be metama, kelim, nor adam biblically. So that's why it fits that the Torah's examples, what is in the keli, oichlin and mashkin. So let me read the psukim. So everything that's in there becomes tummy, meaning food, yitma. And not only that, another detail that normally when something becomes tummy, you can take it to a mikvah, keli. Kleicheres cannot be taken to the mikvah, so the Torah says, va'oy soy sish boiru. That's it. Shviros and zel takonos. That's pasuk lamed gimel. Now let's go to pasuk lamed daled. Guy, this is moededik. So what the Torah gives examples to make. We're not talking about keli. From that we learn that whatever is in there only becomes tummy on a sheni. Mikol ha'oichel asher ya'ochel. Any food that was in the keli. But guys, when it comes to food, foods have to become muksher. So the Torah says, asher yavi olav mayim, food that was muksher, yitma. What does yitma mean? Yitma means it becomes tamei. Then the pasuk, the same pasuk says, and v'chol mashka asher yishase b'chol klei, and liquids that are consumed in a keli. We already had that 2 daf ago. That's a remes to being machshir, mayim that's telushin, but the mashkin that's in there, yitma. So the Torah separates food that's in their yitma, mashkin that's in their yitma. Comes along Rabbi Akiva and he says moededik. He says that when the Torah says something is tamei, you know what word Hashem normally uses? Tamei. Tamei. What's the yitma? What's the yud? Says Rabbi Akiva, the Oibishter writes a yud to tell us that we should not only read yitma, becoming tamei, also read it yitamei. That whatever becomes tamei, right, there is also yitamei, it can pass the tumah further. Rabbi Akiva said that on the ratio of pasuk lamed gimel, that the food that's in there becomes a yitma, yitamei. Now 1 second, like we mentioned, what is the food Yaakov Asheni? Rabbi Akiva says yitma, read it also yitamei. You know what Rabbi Akiva learns from there? That chulin becomes a shlishi. Wow. Because it becomes, food becomes, and it couldn't part. Now, nowhere in the Psukim and Shmini we're speaking about kachin. There we're speaking about stam, we're speaking about chulin also. Let's read it in Sinai. So that's the shiur of Rabbi Akiva. Now, Rabbi Yossi took that and he went running with that. He extended it. So says the Tanan, that Rabbi Yossi, which is Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yamara, what did Rabbi Akiva tell us? This gavaldik word, that when the Torah can write tamei and the Oivishter writes a yud, so then Hashem wants us to vowel it also, Yitma Yitame. The Tanan, Boy Bayoim, guys, Boy Bayoim refers to the day that we learned in Brachas, Daf Chav Zayin, Daf Chav Ches, where Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah was instated as the leader. And he changed the admission policy. And so many new Talmidim came in there. Umi Talmida Yoiser Mikulam, there was so much learning Torah. So on that day, Darash Rabbi Akiva, we read out the Vigoimer. Now, Rabbi Akiva is speaking about the ratio of the pasuk, not the mashke, the oichel. That's what Rabbi Akiva asked. It should say tamei. Yitma. You know why Hashem said Yitma? Pshat becomes Yitma, but also read it Yitama Chedim. Limeid al kiker sheni she'oishe shlishi b'chulin. I know I haven't heard that, but here we learned Rabbi Akiva holds that there is a shlishi b'chulin. So now comes along Rabbi Yossi and he says, according to my Rebbe, he's not going to agree with that. Rabbi Yossi does not subscribe to a shlishi l'chulin. But according to my teacher, so let's use the same limud. It says in the same pasuk, v'chol mashke asher yishasa b'chol keli yitma, says Rabbi Yossi. So then here also, yitma means yitame, it imparts. Now, what are we talking about? We're not speaking now, we're not focusing on the sheni to the shlishi. We're just focusing on that if liquids become tamei, they can impart tuma. Mashkin can impart tuma. So, to what? Not to kalim. How does he know that? We'll see soon. Can't be to kalim. It must mean that if mashkin touch foods, that letame tuma seicholin. So here you have a biblical source, Gavaldik, that mashkin impart tuma to eicholin. So now we continue. Maybe not. Maybe, listen, we're not going to say that mashkin, right, that's a sheni, is going to make a keli. That's impossible, right? But maybe if mashkin touches mashkin, it imparts tuma, but not if it touches eicholin. So for that we say amarat loikachi. That can be loikachoya. So the Gemara says favos nish my loikachoya. Amarat pop. This is the klal, guys. We learned this quickly in Daf Yud Dalet. Now we're going to it greater. Loimotzinu tuma sheoitza ka yoitza ba. You will never find an edible tamei item, edible, that has contact with something that's like it, oichlin, or mashkin, that will impart tuma biblically. Now again, guys, don't jump. People say, Chagai, what was the whole story with Chagai? We learned this on Daf Yud Dalet, Ein Chanami. There are three shitas. Whether this rule, when we learned that Ein Oichel Matama Oichel Midoraisa, that's the klal. Loy Motzino, Tuma Shoitza Kayoitza, but by edibles, food, or mashkin, does it Midoraisa, it does not impart, unless, now, the three-way machlokes and Daf Yud Dalet. Either this limitation is only by chulin. Other shita is, remember, there was Abai, I think Ravada, and then Rava or Ravina, and then we had by chulin and truma, and one holds even by chulin, truma, and kodesh. And according to that shita, the imparting of food to food is only midrabanan and echanami. Let's go back. Ravina says that I don't need to use this klal to know that Rabbi Akiva's concept of yitma yitame cannot go to mashkin. It must be mashkin to oicholin, because I'll be medayik from the pasuk, because since it says yitma letame tumas mashkin, right? You can't say that yitma means lamash, because the is al kadaitach. If yitma the sefer means letame tumas mashkin, if that will be the pshat in the sefer, so then yitma the reisha name letame tumas mashkin. It's also going to have to be in the case of oichel that yitame, which is the actual drasha of Rabbi Akiva. Actual drasha of Rabbi Akiva is to be metama tumas mashkin. Now, why do we have to say that since the sefer is going to mashkin, the reisha goes to mashkin? Says Rashi 6 lines from the bottom of the Amid that the yitma the reisha the chsiv gaba oichel al korchach letame mashkin mekmin al lekame. We're going to learn later that for sure can only go to mashkin, and we're going to see from the tamei hu that hu tamei ve'ein oisa kayetza be'tamei. So that's something that we'll learn later. The reisha of the pasuk is zicher, only speaking about mashkin. So now Ravina says, I have a simple kasha. If the yitma yitame, both in the reisha and in the sefer, is referring to mashkin oy bazoi, then there's an extra word in this pasuk. Then arvinu v'nechtevinu, the Torah should have written in pasuk lamed dalid because oichel asher yochel asher yovel amayim, comma. Don't say yitma. Take out that word. Then continue v'chol mashka asher yishasa v'chol kleili. Now write yitma. And yitma, like Rabbi Akiva expounds, yitma yitame, both referring to oichel being metama mashkin and mashkin being metama mashkin. So today, yitma lamali must be, yitma the reisha has to be, like we said, from the tamei hu, the tamei tumas mashkin. But yitma the sefer is only the tamei tumas eicholin. So Rabbi Yossi is saying that the concept of yitma yitame, my Rebbe will hold that mashkin is metama eicholin mido eiraisa. Hold on, but now, why didn't you say in the sefer again that latame esakelim? That mashkin can be metama kelim. Why does Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon hold? That's the whole shita in the Berais on Daf Zayin. That mashkin is never metama kelim midoy raisa. Why not use yitame kelim? So the Gemara says that can be because valav kalo chomeru. I have a kalo chomer that ma kelim shemetama mashkin, which is the case of the pasuk. The keli became a rishon. The pasuk says mashkin is in there. It makes the mashkin yitma. Nevertheless, a keli cannot be metama keli. A keli is not metama a keli. There is no sheni of a keli midoi raisa, and indeed the psukim that we just read never mentions a keli. So if the keli, the source here, I know the source here is only a rishon, the source is the sheretz, but if the pasuk is now speaking about what the keli in parts conveys to what's in it, if the keli is not metama keli, so the mashkin that became tummy from the keli, but they should be metama the keli. So it can't be that the mashkin in there is going to be matama kelim. It must be.
Wouldn't that make sense if we said that there's a rule that something cannot be matama, something that's the same as itself, right? Like food to
only
food.
Only by edibles. We said that.
You can't apply that to
no, we don't. It's just fact. That's the rules. You're correct. Only by edibles and liquids, both. Right. The aim, however, ki loy metamu, but I can make a difference. I know that in the psukim, the Torah never mentions kelim in there, but that's only mashkin haboy machmas keli. Shkoyach. If the keli is a rishon, the mashkin is a sheni, so that sheni cannot make a keli into a shlishi. That I accept. But maybe mashkin haboy machmas sheretz, but maybe if the mashkin touched the sheretz directly, Yaakov, that was the word there. Not that the sheretz is in the airspace of the keli. If the sheretz touches the mashkin, then the mashkin becomes a rishon. So maybe mashkin on a level of a rishon achinami that it could convey tuma to a sheni. So the Gemara says that can be either. Why can that not be? Because mashkin haboy machma sheretz miksivi. There is no place in the Torah where there is a case in the Chumash that speaks about a sheretz touching mashkin. It's a moededik. No place. Now, so how do you know b'chlal that the mashkin becomes tamei if it has direct contact with the sheretz? I have a kavul chlemet. This pasuk is speaking about a case where the sheretz is matama the keli, and the Torah says the keli is matama the mashkin. But there isn't anywhere of our case of mashkin having contact directly with the sheretz. Daf yutches amid beis. Elamai, if a sheretz touches mashkin, I have a kalvo chaymer that it becomes tummy. And what's the kalvo chaymer? Uma mashkin by machmas kli, which is the case in the pasuk. Sheretz av keli rishon. The Torah says the mashkin in there becomes tummy. So mitamin, here we're learning yitma yitame. Mashkin haboy machmas sheretz. If the sheretz were to touch the mashkin directly, then like kolchchen. So I know that the mashkin that touches a sheretz will become tummy. But now, since I only know that from a kal v'chomer, what was the kasha? Maybe such mashkin should be able to impart tuma biblically to a keli. Maybe mashkin on a level of addition should be matama kelim. No, because of dayoi. Dayoi love him in adin liyos kinidoin. It's sufficient. When you have a teacher and a student, the student cannot be greater than the teacher. The MS students are much greater than the teacher. But in this context, dayoy means that it's enough. It's enough for the derived law to be the same as the source law. What's the source law? The source law is that we're learning it, the mashkin that became tamei from the keli, that you're being moida, that mashkin cannot be metame kelim. And that's the source of Tumas Mashkin. So no Mashkin can be Metama Kalim. You have a Kalvo Chaimet. We use the Kalvo Chaimet for Mashkin that becomes tummy through a Keli, through a Sheretz. Then Mashkin for sure becomes tummy directly with the Sheretz. But you can't impart, now that Mashkin, even though it's at a higher level, cannot impart the Tuma further because the source law, Mashkin that became tummy from a Keli, that Mashkin will not be Metama Kalim. So no mashkin on the level even of a rishon will be matama kelim. Okay. Now says the Gemara, now we're going back to Rabbi Akiva. That yitma dereisha hechidarish. How did he learn yitma? In other words, Rabbi Akiva says yitma yitame, the foods that are in the keli not only becomes but it imparts to others. What others is Rabbi Akiva referring to? Explains the Gemara. It says again, Mikol ha'oichel asher yei ochel asher yavoi olav mayim yitma. Says Rabbi Akiva, yitame. What does it impart to? Only mashkin. When Rabbi Akiva says, even that he said that there's shlishi l'chulin, he didn't say that if oichel touches oichel. He meant that the food that's in the ratio of lamed daled that touches something else, the other thing becomes tummy, but the other thing is only mashkin. Oichel, according to Rabbi Akiva, the oichel that's a sheni can be metama mashkin on the level of a shlishi, biblically. So asks the Gemara, how do you know that? Ato emel latame es mashkin, oy eni elo latame es akeli nachamo. Maybe the food that's in there should impart tuma even to a keli. No. So for that, Rabbi Akiva says, Omrat have a kalvo chaymer. That food cannot be metama ekeli. Now, guys, remember this kalvo chaymer. How do I know that food cannot be metama ekeli? Because mashke shu metama oichel. Mashke that's metama oichel, ain't metama ekeli. That's the rule. As we just established above, mashkin, even if mashkin is an ishin, it cannot be metama ekeli. So oichel she'eina metama oichel, ain't a din shalei metama ekeli. What's mashkin is metama oichel. That was the second yitma yitame. But mashkin can never be metama keli. So oichel that can be metama oichel, for sure oichel cannot be metama keli. So the only area that Rabbi Akiva can use the yitma yitame is for oichel to be metama mashkin. So ho mani mekayim yitma yitame or yitame letame is amashkin. Shehein alulin lekabel. Indeed, mashkin is more prone, is more sensitive to becoming tummy. We're going to focus on that line in a second. But before we explain why do we say that mashkin is more sensitive, the Gemara says, hold on. My iriya mashkin bishum dalulin lekabel tuma. Why do you even have to say that it must be that the oichlin yitma yitame is mashkin because they're more prone? Just say that there's nothing else to apply it to. If you excluded oichlin cannot be metama kelim, and oichlin cannot be metama oichlin, so there's nothing else left. Tepuk leim mishum delakemid achrina. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why we have to add the nuance that mashkin is more prone and more sensitive to becoming tummy, because if you will refute the Kal V'chomer was based on the fact that mashkin is more powerful. Mashkin can be metama oichel. It still cannot be metama keli. Oichel is weaker. Oichel cannot be metama oichel. So you can refute that. Oichel is more chamer. I can argue that oichel is more chamer. Why is that? Because oichel can be metama mashkin. Mashkin cannot be metama mashkin. So now I just knocked off your whole Kal V'chomer. So therefore, let me say that netamiye lekeli. So for that, we have to say that when oichel is metama mashkin, it's not because of the chomer of the oichel. No, it's because of the sensitivity of the mashkin. When two things are imparting one to the other, when aleph is metama beis, either because aleph is taka tama chazer treif, or because the beis is very sensitive. Hahu, the fact that oichel is metama mashkin, that's chumra the mashkinu. Why is that mishum? The mashkin alulin lekabel tuma. What does it mean? Where do we see that mashkin is more sensitive to becoming tummy? Umahi ali lasan. Pashit says the Gemara because shemekablim tuma shalei behechsher. Because for foods to become tummy, it has to be muchsher. Mashkin doesn't need that step prior. Gavaldik. Okay.
Why can't you say that mashkin are just being machsher itself? The same way we said before that part about the
we don't say that. Okay. Now 1 second. Then we learned about that yitma, right? That literally yitma, the literal yitma. This is all Rabbi Akiva's drasha. Yitma means that it acquires tuma. The oichel acquires tuma. Why didn't it say yitame? Yitame, if something imparts, it already means it acquires. The fact that it's vowelized, the way our Masorah is, it acquires, that in itself is hinting that food only becomes, but food will not impart too much to food. That's the source over here. The ein oitza kayoitza ba. In other words, food can be metama mashkin. Mashkin can be metama food. This is all Rabbi Akiva or Shitas Rabbi Yossi expanding Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva only spoke about food being metama mashkin. Rabbi Yossi adds, oy bazoi, my teacher, yitma yitame, mashkin can be metama foods. But food, liquid, that doesn't happen. Again, guys, remember, whether that's only by chulin, maybe by truma, maybe also by kodesh, that's a three-way machlokas amoyroim. Now, says the Gemara, hold on, you're telling me that this limud, that the ein oisa kayoitzaba, comes from the fact that it's vowelized yitma, no, there's another source. And by the way, the other source is what we learned on Daf Yud Dalet. When it says, a few psukim later, Shmini, guys, this is Vayikra Yud Aleph, now Pasik Lamed Ches. The Pasik says, the Chiyutan, that's the famous Chiyutan. And by the way, in the Pasik, it doesn't say it with a Vav. That we learned something else from that. Kiyitein, Kiyutan. Okay, let's go by it. The Chiyutan, my Malazera, Evan, of lesson Olav, Tamehu, the word who is Tame, is extra. We're speaking about a sheretz, a dead sheretz, that fell on seeds that became wet. I got it. The seeds are muksher. Sheretz is the Yaakov and Av. Here the zera becomes a rishon. Tame. Why? Who means that even though the seeds become tame on a level of a rishon, not of a sheni, if they are going to touch other seeds, the other seeds won't become tame at all. Midairaisa. Because ein oichel, metama oichel. Who tamei the ein oisa tumakayotzeba. So now the problem is, since we already have a source that food cannot be metama kayotzeba, why did we need here in the Baraisa Rabbi Akiva another yitma, focusing the fact that the Torah writes yitma, it acquires. On one hand, Yitami lachedim, mashkin. On the other hand, only yitma, because ein oichel, why do we need to have two lemudim? So the Gemara says they need to have two lemudim. One, guys, look at the psukim. One is b'mashkin haboy machma sheretz, in pasuk lamed ches, which is the kiyutan, there, the foods, the zera, is an av. It became tamei directly from a sheretz. We need to have a limit over there that cannot be metama kayotzeba. And then in pasuk lamed dalid, really the yitma, we already spoke about food, but let's go to the mashkin. On the second part, Rabbi Yossi's expansion of Rabbi Akiva, that when you have mashkin, that's the sefer of lamed dalid, mashkin became tummy from the keli that became tummy from the sheretz. So here you have mashkin on a lower level, that also cannot impart mashkin to mashkin. Eino oisa kayotzeba. So the Gemara says, "En vitzricha," because the ashwein and the mashkin by machmas keli we only had which one came first, pasuk lamed dalid. Then I would say, yeah, I get it. If mashkin to begin with is only a sheni, that it cannot impart tuma to other mashkin. Don't forget that Rabbi Akiva holds that there's a shlishi. Fine, but because you're beginning with a sheni, delay chamiri. But maybe in the new case in pasuk lamed ches, mashkin boy machmas sheret. So now the mashkin is a rishon. Maybe since it's chamiri, maybe yes, oisich tuma kayotzeba. So the Torah tells you tamei who. Hold on. So only write lamed ches. V'lashmein and mashkin boy machmas sheret v'kol shem mashkin boy machmas keli. So here we pull out this card. God forbid. And again, good. Here we pull out this concept that milsa the asya b'kal v'chaymer tarach v'kosav b'kra. Yes, we could have learned it through a kal v'chaymer, but we find that even dinim that could be learned out from a kal v'chaymer, nevertheless, the Torah sometimes goes through the effort to write it explicitly. Guys, this is linked also to the sugya that ein oinshin min hadin. Din means kal v'chaymer. So if something would only be learned from a kal v'chaymer, there's a weakness to it. Not that there's einish, but this can lead to an einish. Ein oinshin min hadin. Also, a kal v'chaymer is a logic. A logic can be refuted. So there's other reasons for that. That's a klal that sometimes the Torah writes even that which would have been learned from a kal v'chaymer. There's also the fact that the Torah is so multi-layered. There's a pshat on the level of pshat. Then it was not needed because you would have learned it from a kal v'chaymer. But the Torah is alluding to be'elyonim. There's other things that are being alluded to. Those other things cannot be learned from a kal v'chaymer. But anyway, here we go. Okay, so now we explained, we showed, based on all of these klalim, that there's a source in the Chumash that mashkin is metama oichlin, but mashkin is not metama kelim. This is the shita of Rab Shimon. This is what Rabbi Yossi said, but that's only Rabbi Yossi explaining what Rabbi Akiva will hold. Amalei Ravino le Ravashi. Hold on. Loi Omar Rava, did Rava not say that Loi Rabbi Yossi Savek Rabbi Akiva, Loi Rabbi Akiva Savek Rabbi Yossi? We'll explain soon what that means. They don't hold of each other. Here, the Brais and Daf Tezayin is not Rabbi Akiva and Rab Shimon. It's Rabbi Yossi and Rab Shimon. So Ravashi tells Ravina, guys, Ravashi and Ravina, they were the ones that compiled the Gemara. So Amalei says Ravashi, yes, looks good. I agree with Rava. Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold of it. Rabbi Yossi doesn't darshan Yitma Yitame. If you take out the Yitma Yitama, you have no source biblically that mashkin is Matama Oichlin. Rabbi Yossi said the Brais on Daf Tezayin only b'shitas Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Amara. But v'lei loy svirolei. Rabbi Yossi holds like Rav Meir. Ha! So yesterday we said that Rabbi Yehuda, at least in some says like Rav Meir, in part. Now Rabbi Yossi completely holds like Rav Meir. See the greatness of Rav Meir? But slowly people came around. Okay. And again, that's the tzlach's vart, that since the Gemara doesn't say that regarding Rav Shimon, that's why the beginning of the sugya only focused on Rabbi Yossi. We want to separate them. But let's understand the statement of Rava. What was Rava referring to and where did he get it from? So now, Amar le Ravashi le Rav Kahana. So Ravina asked Ravashi. Ravashi, who had a kasha, didn't ask Ravina. He went to Rav Kahana. And he says, okay, now I heard the statement of Rava. I'm going to be makabelet, but please explain it to me. That this shleima, that Rava goes ahead, we're trying to figure out Rava now. That Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold of Rabbi Akiva. I know that has to be, he's right, Rava. Because, like this, the Tanya. Amar Rabbi Yossi. This is the Braisa that Ravashi knew. Minayin l'revi ba'kodesh shuhu pasal. Where do you have a source that Revi and Kodesh, it's stuck at the end of the line, but there's a concept of Revi ba'kodesh? So you know where Rabbi Yossi learns it from? He learns it from the following Kal V'Chomer. Vidinu. Let me explain this by heart. Guys, this is so gewaldig. A person who's a Rishon, who goes to the mikvah, a person who's an Av that goes to the mikvah. Once this is the end, they now already can eat chulin. We're going to learn at the end of Chagiga that they can even eat Meiser Sheni. But until it becomes dark, they cannot eat Truma, and therefore Avada, they can't eat Kodesh. Again, that's what the first Mishnah Barachas alludes to. How do you know it's dark? That means if a Kohen was Tomei, he went to the mikvah. From the mikvah until night, he's called a Tful Yom. A Tful Yom biblically has a level of a Sheni. To be Metame, Truma. It's called a week, a vestige of Truma. Now, Rabbi Yossi says, let me ask you something. After it gets dark, we know that he's allowed to eat Truma, but the few people that also have to wait for another step. So, for example, a Zav, who not only has to wait until it gets dark, that we know to him to eat Truma if he's a Kohen, but for him to eat Kachim, he has to bring the Korbanos that a Zav has to bring on the next day, on the 8th day. From dark, from head of Shemesh until he brings the Karbanas, this person, it can be a woman also, is called a Mechusar Kippurim. A Mechusar Kippurim is allowed to eat Truma, but they can't eat Kodesh. So Rabbi Yossi extrapolates from that. He says, is a raya that Kodesh is one step more sensitive than Truma. Because if you have a person, before night, you can't even eat Truma. But then there comes a time that you can eat Truma, but you can't eat Kodesh. Is a raya that Kodesh is more sensitive than Truma to Truma. At night, there's less vestige, but there's still something there. Now, this is something that you can debate. Actually, we'll see. Rabbi Akiva doesn't accept this concept. But Rabbi Yossi is saying this. So hold on. So no, it's whatever you can decide, whatever the level of Truma is by Truma, so then this is called a Kal V'Chomer from the concept of Mechusar Kippurim, that Kodesh will go one step further. Now, Shlishi, we know, is puzzled by Truma, and everyone agrees to that. Right? They're Sheni by Chulin, they're Shlishi by Truma. So says Rabbi Yisrael, well, if Truma becomes even a Shlishi, so then Ein Adin that Sheyase Revi B'Kodesh. Now there's something important because of the Dayo rule. If Kodesh is becoming more Tameh because we're learning it from Truma, we just learned Dayo. If the teacher to Kodesh is Truma, well, Truma only becomes a Shlishi. You can't jump that Kodesh goes one step more. But here's the big exception. Wherever the only application of the Kal V'Chomer is for the one step further, then you have to go one step further. When you know zero and the Kal V'Chomer can teach you a little bit, but then you want to add plus, then we say, no. Then we say that the derived law cannot be more than the source law. And here we're going to show, as the next line here in this Rabbi Yossi, that's why V'lomadnu shlishi b'kodesh min ha'Torah. Had I not even known that Kodesh becomes a Shlishi, if the whole source is from Truma, then there's no way I can use a Kal V'Chomer and then say, well, that Kodesh is more sensitive than Truma, it goes to Revi. But since I don't need a Kal V'Chomer to teach me Shlishi b'Kodesh, that I already know. So the only application of the Kal V'Chomer is only going to be to go from a Shlishi to a Revi. So now, yes, Revi, I learn from a Kal V'Chomer, and we don't say Dayoi, like in the last line, this is a cloud that we're learning Bava Kama. That the last line of Nashi, the Mifrach Kal V'Chomer, if there's nothing to learn from the Kal V'Chomer other than going beyond the source law, then we don't say Dayoi. Oh, very good. And now, hold on. So now what we have to, in the Gemara now is going to explain. How did Rabbi Yossi know Shlishi b'Kodesh and Shlishi min ha'Torah d'chsiv gavaldik? A pasuk in Tzav says, "V'habasar Rashi guys Tzav is Kodesh, Tzav is Kodesh." V'habasar Rashi yiga daf yutes b'chol tamei, that if meat of kachim touches anything that's tamei, you can't eat that meat. We just learned today, my friends, Shmini's chulin, but we learned an explicit pasuk without Rabbi Akiva's yitma yitamei. The meat in the keli in which a sheretz went in is a sheni. Biblically, sheretz av, keli, rishon. So the Torah already spoke about meat becoming a sheni. And so when it says in Parshat Tzav that if kachim touches any tamei, that can even mean a sheni, lo yei achel, Torah didn't say that kachim only lo yeh achal if it touches a rishon. Touches tamei. The Torah gives examples where meat, even of chulin, becomes a sheni. So that mi lo yaskinen also the naga b'sheni. So now that we have an explicit source by its own, that kachim can become a shlishi, now you use the kal v'chomer to be a kal v'chomer kedamrinan. All this is Rab Yoisi. So now concludes Rav Ashi is building up his question to Rav Kahana. Rav Ashi is saying, listen, I know part of Rav's statement, and I'll tell you the part. If Rabbi Yosi himself would have agreed with Rabbi Akiva, what does Rabbi Akiva hold? Rabbi Akiva holds that even chulin is a shlishi. Let's use the same logic. When a person is at full yoim, can he eat chulin? Yes. Can he eat truma? Not. That proves that truma is more sensitive to tuma. So if Rabbi Yosi would hold that chulin is already on the level of a shlishi, like Rabbi Akiva, then he would have held then that truma goes until a revi and kachim go until a chamishi. You guys, there's not enough time, but Rashi again works out that you don't say dayoi because of this concept that in all of these cases that we just mentioned, step number one, without the kal v'chomer, the only application is to go a step further. So nitni, there has to be somewhere where we learn that there's a revi batruma v'chamishi b'kodesh.
Rabbi, does Rabbi Akiva actually hold that way?
No.
Meaning because he holds shlishi for chulin, does he also go?
And now, so Rabbi asked him, okay, but how do you know? Rabbi Akiva, how do you know that Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold it? From this, Danny, that's the answer. That's now Rav Kahana is telling him, I'll tell you the answer. If Rabbi Akiva would have subscribed to the Baraisa that we just learned, that because a person can eat truma, but they can't eat kachim, proves that kachim is more sensitive, then Rabbi Akiva indeed would have said this. Then at least Rabbi Akiva would have said this. But is it possible that no Tana ever taught that? And no Tana ever taught that. We would have found a Baraisa that would have had such a sheet, and then we would have chapped that it goes according to Rabbi Akiva. So look at the raya. We have a very funny raya. How do you know Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold of it? Because we don't find anywhere such a concept. Is that a raya? This is Rav Ashi says that's not a proof. Just because no Tana, no Mishnah, no Baraisa ever recorded such an opinion, that in itself is not a proof. This is called evidence. By the absence of such a Baraisa, that's not called evidence. So Rav Ashi was bothered. Rav Ashi is not rejecting Rav, but Rav Ashi is trying to figure out from where did Rav know that Rabbi Akiva does not hold like Rabbi Yosi. So Nafek Rav Ashi or Rav Kahana accepted Rav Ashi's criticism. The absence of a source in a Tana is not a raya. And they found, and Dr. Ashkach, listen to what they found. It found the Mishnah in Chagiga. Now Chagiga goes mamish. You have Ein Darshan, right? That's mamish Kabbalah. That's Chasidus. Maisa MERCAVA, Maisa Bereshis. That's the second chapter in Chagiga. And then the third chapter, what's greater than Maisa MERCAVA? Tomantara. So the third chapter in Chagiga, Chomer B'Kodesh. The Mishnah is enumerating Chomer B'Kodesh, that there are certain things that Kodesh is even more than Truma. One of the things is Hakli Mitzaref. Let me explain to you something. When you have a keli, and in it you have two piles of food that are not touching each other, and the source of Truma touches one of those piles. Now, normally, if the foods are not touching each other, so let's say an Av touches this pile, this becomes a Rishon. We already said that biblically, a Rishon cannot even make a keli a sheni. That's the end of that. There's a concept only by Kodesh, not by Truma, that the keli combines. Since these two piles are in the same keli, we're not speaking about a flat board, we're speaking about it with a receptacle. So it's as if they're all touching each other. So if a sheretz, God forbid, will touch this part of the kachim, not only will this be a rishon, but all the food in the keli becomes a rishon. The Tanan, hakeli, mitzad, if it combines, it's mashu b'toichi, only l'kodesh and not the truma. So that's one of the chomer that kachim have even over truma. The next statement in this Mishnah in Chagiga, haravi b'kodesh pasal. The end of the line is ravi. The end of the line of truma shlishi. So what? I'll tell you. So what? Rabbi Yochanan links this Mishnah with Rabbi Akiva. That's the price. And Rabbi Yochanan me'edusha shel Rabbi Akiva nishneis Mishnah zu. And we're quoting now Mishnah in Idiois. This is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the one that not only if food is inside a keli, is the keli mitzad of the food, But we add, Rabbi Akiva, that if you have fine flour in a keli, now the mile of a fine flour is, think about it, flours is made out of brekelach. So even if they are all in the same pile, if a source of tumah touches soilus, do we say that all of it becomes tamei? It's not one gush. I will argue, well, the part of the flour that touched the tumah becomes rishon, and then the part right next to it becomes a sheni, right? And let's go by truma, by kachim, even though that ain't oichel kayotzeba, but midrabanan it goes down, but at a certain point it stops. But no, but again, by kachim, we say, since it's in the same keli, it's as if the tumah touched everything. And that Rabbi Akiva says that goes to fine flour, that goes to ketaidas. These are all items that are made out of little particles, or made out of frankincense, or gechalam kol nabchlau. Frankincense and coal, they're not edibles. Normally, tumah is only by adam, kalim, oichlin, mashkin. But chibas hakoides machsharten, as we'll explain in the next year. But the concept of mitzdaref, Rabbi Akiva adds that she'im nagal tful yom has a din of a sheni. Whatever he touches becomes a shlishi. The mitzvasan is posal es kulam. So the fact that Rabbi Yochanan links the Mishnah that we quoted in Chagiga to Rabbi Akiva, and the Mishnah in Chagiga says Revi in Chamishi loy, right? Shlishi in Revi loy. That's a raya that Rabbi Akiva does not hold to Rabbi Yossi, because here Rabbi Akiva is opining, that Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva. If Rabbi Akiva would have held of this type of Kal V'Chomer, he can have Truma but not Kachim, but that's called a Kal V'Chomer, then Rabbi Akiva would have held that there is a Revi Batruma, that there is a Chamishi Ba'Kodesh, and the Mishnah in Chagiga, according to Rabbi Yochanan, is linked to Rabbi Akiva, says the opposite, says what we know, the end of the line is Shlishi by Truma. The end of the line is Revi Ba'Kodesh. So not only does Rabbi Yossi not hold like Rabbi Akiva, but Rabbi Akiva does not hold like Rabbi Yossi. That was amazing. We only have 2 more daf chaval, but let's chaparain. Mirz Hashem, we have a daf chaf and a daf yutes and a daf chaf, still imbued with the dinam of Tum and Tara.
Good, Rabbi.
Good Shabbos. Thank you.
It's good, huh? Chaval, we're almost done with it. Tzemach is going to miss it.
What am I going to miss?
The whole Tum and Tara.
Why am I going to miss it?
Because we're going to be finished it.
Temporarily, sadly.
By the way, it's good stuff to drive in the car listening to. That's what I think.